Hey there, what's up? I'm Anthony Tresca, and welcome to this episode of Spooky Scraps, where we take a horror property, find something weird or obscure about it, and then we talk about that. Joining me today to talk about the Heathers musical is none other than Dr. Katherine Troyer.
Yay, I'm very excited. I like the fact that many of our spooky scraps are really just opportunities for us to talk about the accompanying musical for the horror. And then that's what we're going to be doing with Heathers, and we're going to talk about the Heathers musical. And as someone that adores musicals, I'm always excited for opportunities to talk about especially horror musicals, right? You can't beat that combination.
Horror musicals are my sweet spot. There's a surprising number of horror musicals. Yes. I guess when people see horror movies, they're like, you know, what would make this even scarier is if everybody just started singing and dancing.
Yeah, and some of them make sense, right? Like Evil Dead, of course there's going to be a musical. I would even argue Heathers, of course there's going to be a musical. Other ones like American Psycho, which didn't last for very long. Maybe it didn't last for very long because it wasn't meant to be a musical, or maybe people just weren't ready for the awesomeness that was it as a musical. But there are certainly some horror that it's like, of course there has to be singing and dancing, because truly, what could be more horrific?
If you're following the bubble formula that you apply to the most musical theater pieces in which you have characters that are experiencing such strong emotions that it is incapable of them to express their emotions in words anymore. So if those feelings bubble up and they are forced to sing, what other genre experiences such a clear bubbling of emotions like the horror genre? So it makes perfect sense that we find ourselves blessed with a number of horror musicals.
Yes, and I wanted to feel blessed by the Heathers musical. I know. Okay, so
we did not talk about this before we came on.
Yeah.
I did not realize this was going to be a Heathers musical hate episode from you.
I tried to warn you just briefly that I was going to say some things you didn't like, but what I didn't tell you was I'm not going to say very many things you do like. Okay, so just to begin,
here we go.
I wanted a Heathers musical because to me that makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense not only because it's a teen, comedy horror, and that works nicely for things like musicals, not only because I just think that it's a movie that needs songs, but also because the surreal nature of Heathers is, and this like where we just have to accept everything even though none of it makes sense. That's what musicals are all about, right? You're watching it and you're like, I don't understand why they're bursting into song because that doesn't make sense, except it does. And Heathers has that built into it, baked into it already. So I was so excited. And then I worked my way through. Now I have to say, in Heather's defense, I have not seen a live version. And let's face it, musicals need to be experienced live. And hearing an audience that you are not a part of chuckling does not necessarily endear you to the performance, right? If you're not part of that audience in the moment. So I have to begin with that. But I need to know, Anthony, like, what is it that you like so much about Heathers the musical?
So... in a completely opposing stance, I love Heathers the musical. I've been following it for a while. I'm a bit of a Heathers the musical super fan myself. I've of course was obsessed with the 2014 off-Broadway production of it. I was less obsessed with the terrible West End production of Heathers, which you can fight me in the comments below if you want, but I think that musical sucks. It's a terrible adaptation of it because it waters down what I love so much about the Heathers musical, which is it is this extension of a lot of the campy, funny moments that work in the movie. I think it's funnier than the movie. I think that the actors who they've assembled, for the most part, with the exception of JD, are better than their counterparts in the film. I think that they add in elements to the storyline and flesh out moments that are kind of just like skipped over in the film, like the whole curtain ram dead gay son extended scene is a hilarious scene.
I liked that scene quite a bit,
and I think it's one of just the many ways in which the musical builds off of the campy goodness that is already present in the source material itself. And I also like a lot of the things that the original 2014 production does in terms of the blocking in terms of how it amplifies. It's a very minimalist production in the sense that it doesn't have a lot of flashy set pieces or elaborate scene changes and props and costume things, but it really well executes what it does do, and I think that it works really well.
So I have to agree with you in terms of the production itself. I thought that I liked the choice of stage design. I thought that worked nicely for this thing that is somewhat in Veronica's head and somewhat in real life. Mm-hmm. I thought the performances were lovely. It was nice to see a more diversified cast.
Yeah.
And I thought like the development of certain characters, like getting to see more of the teacher, who was like, and
Miss Fleming is a hoot.
Yes, and there were some lines that she delivered, right? Like, she talks about there's no more important decision that a teenager makes than whether or not to kill themselves, right? Like, there were just some really great moments in there. Obviously, if you've listened to our podcast episodes, you know that no one is ever going to be JD other than Christian Slater for me. In fact, I would probably still be more willing to see him as like a 50 or 60-year-old man playing JD than just about anyone else playing JD.
Yeah, and admittedly, JD is the element of the musical production that I think they do drop the ball on, because I don't think the songs that they have for JD, Freeze Your Brain, what is that? That is not a very good song. Yeah. It kind of it ruins part of the appeal of what I like about JD, is that he starts as being this incredibly charismatic figure that Veronica gets lured to. But in the musical, they already start him off as kind of a creepy weirdo.
Yeah, he's
Veronica
lurking.
Sees through it.
Yeah.
He sees through his thing immediately, whereas in the movie, she doesn't. And I think that is a change for the worse.
And I think some of that is an issue of blocking, even though, again, I've been praising it, right? They kind of purposefully cast him on the outskirts of the stage, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the film has a lot of shots where he's framed very specifically as the center of Veronica's world. I also really appreciated Veronica and the jocks, the ghosts of Veronica and the jocks lurking and how they would come in, and I thought all of that was lovely. But here are my problems with Heathers the Musical. So one, apologies, I didn't find the music as catchy as I thought it could have been. It certainly was no Mean Girls, which I think may be the worst music I've ever heard, period. But it wasn't. It could have been so much more considering how stylized the film was. But my real problem was sort of twofold. One, I didn't actually like the idea of introducing Heather as as Veronica joining the Heathers, as opposed to the film where she's already a part of the group. And we talked about this, right? We talked about this in our podcast. And so this leads me to my bigger issue, and that is what makes Heathers the film so amazing is that the entire time it is poking fun and acting at tension to the genres that it is representing. But I felt like Heathers the Musical wasn't doing that. It was basically being a musical that happened to be about this sort of uncomfortable conversation, and I wanted the musical to be poking fun at the genre of musicals as well. I didn't want it to conform.
Oh, that's interesting.
I felt like the musical conformed, and the whole film is about the problems of conformity. And then that led to me having other problems. Like, I really, really had a problem with the song that the one friend sings about her, like, childhood
kindergarten boyfriend.
And I had a problem with that because in the movie, we realized, you know what? It is not okay to be making fun of this person. It is not okay that we were doing this. In the musical, it was, oh, poor fat girl. But let's give her a song, but let's make fun of her the entire time she's singing it, even as she's giving us the most authentic emotions of the film, of the musical. And that really irked me because I felt like it was missing the spirit of what makes Heathers so amazing. And so it was not the musical I felt that Heathers deserved.
I think I hear those complaints. I think it sounds like I do enjoy the music quite a bit more than it sounds like you did on this experience. I think a lot of it does work really well, and a lot of the leitmotifs that it introduces, as well as it has some pretty effective reprises throughout the musical that I think work. It sounds like they work better for me than you. One of the fun things about theater and art, it's entirely subjective, and that's where we are.
I think I would have enjoyed the music more if this bigger issue for me, right? It wasn't either the music had to be something that it was going to be an earworm that I would never get out of my head, or it had to break free of the mold of the musical and give us something transgressive like the film is. It had to do one or the other, and instead it did neither. And that's where I ran into the problem.
Yeah, I think I mean, the pop rock musical format, as it's already becoming overdone as of late, even though it was not a super big common thing at that point in 2014 yet. It was right on the cusp of becoming oversaturated, and that's just like the default that everyone does. So I think it was probably perhaps a little bit more inventive when it first came out, but now I definitely see where you're coming from in terms of like it just falls right into the trappings of musicals. And I think I agree with you that I do wish it was a slightly bit more transgressive. However, I think I do disagree, and that I like the more overt camp that the musical is playing in, as opposed to what the movie does, which is more of it is still campy, obviously, as we've referred to, but in this you can clearly tell the actors have been told to lean into the campiness of it, and I think it works well in making the whole thing feel less serious, which I think works ultimately in the favor of the musical, because it's being like, these issues that we're bringing up, they're not serious, though. They are issues, but we're not going to treat them seriously. We're going to make fun of every single thing in a way that I don't think the movie was making fun of these issues.
And I think that's why I was so excited about the idea of a musical, right? Because I wanted that camp. This is one of the few times where I wanted that camp, and I got it. But I think, for me, I got it at the expense of horror. Like, I needed it to also be campy about horror. Instead, it became just like another teen narrative that just happens to involve someone blowing themselves up in a little bit of death, instead of Heather's, where I felt like it was a lot of death with some moments of levity, and I wanted it to feel like a true horror musical.
Now, that is something that is absolutely true and undisputable, is that it's no longer a horror property. The musical is not. It is super fun, and I enjoy it, and it's very campy, and I think it's delightful, and I will absolutely go see your high school production of Heathers, or your college production of Heathers.
Thank you.
So just link those in the comments below if any of you are involved in Heathers productions, because I will always see a production of Heathers. But it's certainly not a horror musical anymore.
And sure. I think if I watched it maybe now that I know what it is, I might like it a lot more. Because it wasn't bad. It just wasn't... It just lost the magic that I was so looking forward to in the musical.
Yeah, I think in this it's far more of a parody of teen genres, whereas in the film it's a light parody, but it is more of being like seriously trying to grapple with the issues of cliques and social status and the socially constructed nature of the world around us. Whereas the only time the musical really dabbles in that is when it pulls direct lines from the film and has the characters just say them.
So that is our takes, where we have had very violently different perspectives on this musical, but still always on the quest for the perfect horror musical. We have more spooky scraps coming your way shortly, and in the meantime, have a spooktacular day.